Greetings and welcome back to Mythic Memoirs, where we bring you the most fascinating and bone-chilling true crime stories from around the world. As always, we've scoured the archives to bring you a tale that will leave you on the edge of your seat, so sit back, relax, and get ready to be transported into the dark and twisted world of true crime. The Black Dahlia Murder was a crime that shocked the nation. It was brutal, gruesome, and seemingly senseless. A young woman, Elizabeth Short, brutally killed and mutilated in the streets of Los Angeles. And as the investigation into her death began, it became clear that the case was far from ordinary. For Detective John Smith, the case would become a personal obsession. He saw the Black Dahlia murder as more than just a crime. It was a puzzle, a challenge, a chance to delve into the darkest depths of the human mind. He knew that it wouldn't be an easy road, but he was willing to do whatever it took to bring the killer to justice. In the following chapters, we will explore the investigation into the Black Dahlia murder, and the journey that Detective Smith took to solve the case. From the discovery of Elizabeth's body to the pursuit of potential suspects, we will delve into the complexities of the investigation and the human psyche. And we will see how, through tireless work and determination, justice was finally served for the victim of one of the most notorious crimes in American history. Detective John Smith had seen his fair share of gruesome murder scenes during his career with the LAPD. But the discovery of Elizabeth Short's body in that vacant lot was something that would haunt him for years to come. As he approached the scene, he could already see the crowd of curious onlookers gathered around the yellow police tape. He pushed his way through, his eyes scanning the area for any clues or evidence that could help him solve the case. The body was lying face up, her pale skin stark against the dark soil. Her hair was jet black and cut short, and her lips were painted a bright shade of red. She was dressed in a black tailored suit, which only added to the eerie, almost staged quality of the scene. Smith knelt down beside the body, his hand instinctively going to his pocket for his notebook. He took a deep breath, trying to push aside the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. He began to meticulously document the scene, noting the position of the body, the condition of the clothing, and any other details that could be relevant to the investigation. He interviewed witnesses, gathered potential evidence, and took photographs to preserve the crime scene. As the night wore on, Smith couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to be different from any he had worked before. Elizabeth Short's murder was unlike anything he had ever seen, and he knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But he was determined to find her killer and bring them to justice, no matter what it took. And so, with a heavy heart, he headed back to the station to begin his investigation in earnest. As Detective Smith delved deeper into the investigation of the Black Dahlia murder, he became increasingly fascinated with the victim, Elizabeth Short. Who was she, and why had someone killed her in such a brutal and gruesome way? He began to piece together her background, starting with her upbringing in Massachusetts. She had been one of 5 daughters, and her father had abandoned the family when she was just a child. From there, Elizabeth had bounced around, never quite finding her place in the world. Eventually, she made her way to Hollywood, hoping to become an actress. But despite her striking looks and charm, she struggled to make a name for herself in the competitive world of show business. Along the way, she became known for her relationships with men, some of whom were wealthy and powerful. And as Detective Smith learned more about these men, he began to wonder if any of them could be connected to her murder. But Elizabeth wasn't just a woman with a complicated personal life, she was also someone who had dreams and aspirations. As Smith dug deeper into her past, he found evidence of her writing and poetry, and he couldn't help but wonder what she might have accomplished if given the chance. He began to see Elizabeth not just as a victim, but as a complex and multifaceted human being. And as the investigation continued, he made a vow to do everything in his power to find her killer and bring them to justice, not just for the sake of the case, but for Elizabeth herself. Detective Smith had a growing list of potential suspects in the Black Dahlia murder case. As he delved deeper into each person's background, he began to uncover a web of complex relationships and hidden motives. There was Mark Hansen, a wealthy nightclub owner who had been known to frequent the same haunts as Elizabeth. Some claimed that he had been infatuated with her and had become possessive and jealous, while others suggested that he had connections to the mob and was involved in illegal activities. Then there was Robert Manley, a salesman who had been one of the last people to see Elizabeth alive. He had claimed that he had dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel and had seen her enter the lobby, but his story had inconsistencies that made Smith suspicious. There were others too, men who had been linked to Elizabeth in one way or another, whether through romantic relationships or business dealings. And as Smith dug deeper, he found that many of them had reasons to want her dead, from jealousy and revenge to financial gain. But as the investigation continued, none of the suspects seemed to fit neatly into the puzzle. Each had their own secrets and hidden agendas, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for Smith to find the thread that would lead him to the killer. The pressure was mounting, both from his colleagues and from the public, who were demanding answers and justice for Elizabeth Short. Smith knew that he had to keep digging, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths and making tough decisions. And so, he pushed on, determined to find the person responsible for the Black Dahlia's death, no matter what it took. Detective Smith's investigation into the Black Dahlia murder continued to be a frustrating and grueling process. Every lead seemed to take him down a different path, and the evidence he gathered only raised more questions than answers. Meanwhile, his personal life was starting to take a toll. He was neglecting his family and his own well-being in his pursuit of the killer, and he was struggling to balance the demands of the case with his own emotional well-being. But despite the challenges, Smith was determined to see the investigation through to the end. He pored over witness statements and combed through evidence, hoping to find the clue that would break the case wide open. And finally, his hard work began to pay off. He found a witness who had seen a man with a distinctive scar near the crime scene on the night of the murder. It was a small detail, but it was enough to lead Smith to a suspect, a man named George Hodel, a doctor with a sordid past and a possible connection to Elizabeth Short. Smith's investigation into Hodel was intense and thorough, and the more he learned, the more convinced he became that he had finally found the killer. But as he prepared to make an arrest, he found himself facing resistance from his superiors, who were wary of accusing a man with such a high profile. Smith refused to back down, though. He knew that he had the evidence to support his case, and he was willing to risk everything to bring Hodel to justice. The tension mounted as the case came to a head, and Smith found himself in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse with a dangerous and unpredictable suspect. But he never wavered, and in the end, his determination paid off. Hodel was arrested and eventually convicted for Elizabeth Short's murder. It was a bittersweet victory for Smith, who had sacrificed so much in his pursuit of justice. But as he looked back on the case, he knew that he had done everything in his power to bring closure to a terrible and tragic crime. After months of tireless work, Detective Smith finally had a breakthrough in the Black Dahlia murder case. He had zeroed in on George Hodel as the prime suspect, and he was determined to bring him to justice. Smith gathered all the evidence he had collected over the course of the investigation and prepared to make his move. But he knew that Hodel was a dangerous man, and that he needed to be careful if he was going to make the arrest successfully. The day of the arrest was tense and nerve-wracking. Smith and his team surrounded Hodel's home, ready to apprehend him at a moment's notice. They knocked on the door, and after a few tense moments, Hodel emerged. Smith wasted no time. He read Hodel his rights and took him into custody, confident that he finally had the man responsible for Elizabeth Short's death. But the case was far from over. Hodel was a slippery suspect, and he fought tooth and nail to avoid conviction. He had connections and resources that made him a formidable opponent, and it seemed like the case might never be solved. But Smith refused to back down. He worked tirelessly, gathering new evidence and building a stronger case against Hodel. And finally, his hard work paid off. Hodel was found guilty of Elizabeth's murder, and justice was served. It was a bittersweet victory for Smith. On one hand, he was relieved that the case had finally been solved, and that Elizabeth's killer had been brought to justice. But on the other hand, he knew that the case had taken a toll on him, both personally and professionally. As he looked back on the case, he knew that he had given it his all, and that was all he could ask of himself. The Black Dahlia murder would always be a dark chapter in Los Angeles history, but thanks to the tireless efforts of Detective Smith, justice had been served. The Black Dahlia murder was one of the most gruesome and high-profile crimes in Los Angeles history, and it remains a source of fascination and intrigue to this day. Despite the decades that have passed since Elizabeth Short's death, the case continues to captivate people around the world, with countless theories and investigations attempting to unravel the mystery of her killer. Through the chapters of this story, we followed Detective John Smith as he investigated the crime and pursued justice for Elizabeth Short. We saw the gruesome discovery of her body, the exploration of her background and personal life, the pursuit of potential suspects, and the grueling investigation that ultimately led to the arrest and conviction of George Hodel. Throughout it all, Smith showed a fierce determination to find the killer and bring them to justice. He faced obstacles and setbacks, both personal and professional, but he never wavered in his pursuit of the truth. And in the end, his hard work paid off, the killer was caught, and Elizabeth Short was finally given the justice she deserved. But even with the case solved, the Black Dahlia murder continues to haunt us. It is a reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of any city, and the complexity of human nature. And as long as the case remains unsolved in the minds of some, it will continue to capture our imaginations and spark our curiosity. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the mind of darkness and the investigation into the Black Dahlia murder. It's been an incredible experience to delve into the complexities of the case and the human psyche, and to see how Detective John Smith worked tirelessly to bring justice to Elizabeth Short. I hope you found this video informative and engaging, and that you learned something new about this infamous case. If you did, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more content like this. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Black Dahlia murder and the investigation into the case. Do you think justice was served? Who do you think was responsible for Elizabeth Short's death? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.